Hi everyone, my name is Britt. I work for YWCA Spokane in their Alternatives to Domestic Violence program, and today, since I am in my house practicing some safe social distancing practices, I thought it would be a good idea to make a video about some basic safety planning tips. So these can be tips for when you are currently dealing with an abuser, trying to leave an abuser, or have left an abuser. And obviously safety plans are going to look different for everybody, but there are some kind of basic tips that we can use and things to keep in mind when you're coming up with what to do for yourself. My little notes up at the top here that we're going to start with. So it's going to be unique to everyone. A safety plan is going to maybe look different for you than it would for somebody else, and that's okay. You can talk to an advocate, a therapist about this. You can talk to your friends and family if they're safe. Like, coming up with a safety plan is going to be unique to you, but there are some very basic things that we can use in a safety plan. The other piece is that this stuff is not the fault of the person being abused. There are things that a person can do to stay safer. There are ways that they can sort of regain a sense of control over their life and what they're experiencing, but sometimes no amount of safety planning will keep someone safe, and that is not their fault, and that is not their responsibility. It is the responsibility of the abuser. So it's really important to remember when safety planning, if you're making your own safety plan or helping someone else make a safety plan, is that sometimes no amount of safety planning will work, and that it is not the job of the person being abused to stop the abuse. That is, responsibility is on the abuser, because they are the ones doing the abusing. It's a really common message that, you know, survivors and victims need to do more to stop the abuse happening to them, and I don't agree with that. So, important note to make before we start. Now, section 1, I've got my handy dandy little guide here. Obviously, this is going to be some basics. This isn't going to be everything, but some basic things to consider when you are interacting with your abuser. Now, interacting with your abuser can mean you are co-parenting with this person, you are still living with this person, you have to communicate with them in some fashion. This is some good tips to start with. So, knowing the layout of where you are, and if possible, knowing the tendencies of the person who's being abusive. So some abusers are intentionally all over the place. Sometimes they're intentionally unpredictable in order to make it harder to deal with them. So this is not always possible, but sometimes they do have some patterns or things that they rely on. Those are good to know if you can track them. The other piece here, so knowing the layout, that can mean knowing where the rooms are, where the doors are, which doors lock, where are the windows, are there weapons in the home or things that can be used as weapons in the home. The other piece is like thinking about cell phone service. Do you have cell phone service? Are there spots in the building where there isn't cell phone service? Some of those things are going to be really important to consider. And then next, communicating with your neighbors or just whoever is around you. So if that's a safe thing to do, I would highly recommend it. Abuse thrives in secrecy, and so one of the key ways that we can maybe sort of lessen its blow sometimes is to communicate with the people around us. Just letting them know that we're there, even if you don't feel comfortable or safe disclosing the abuse to them, making them aware of our presence and letting them know that we are here can go a long way, and it can help us in a lot of ways. If you do decide to tell those people about the abuse that's going on, sometimes they can even become part of our safety plan overall. So that can be a really powerful tool. This feeds into the next tip, which is having a safe word system or a signal that we can either text to a safe person, that we can signal to them from across the road or from our house to their house. Anything like that can be a really powerful tool if you feel like you are alone in something. So if you feel like you need someone to call the police for you, if you want someone to come check on you, if you want someone to call you, having a safe word or a safe signal that you can tell to that person can sometimes be helpful. And then the last piece is documenting if you can. So documenting incidents of abuse, documenting when they happen, what happened, if that's a safe thing to do. That can come up really handy if you end up having to take any legal action later on. It can also just be good for us mentally to be able to look back on a situation, because sometimes when we've walked away from something, our feelings about it might be complicated, and being able to look back on what happened and having that concrete reminders of here's the things that happened to me, because sometimes make us feel less alone and maybe even a little bit less crazy, because being in an abusive relationship can make people feel pretty crazy. So that's a really good tip just for yourself, even if you end up never having to use it in a legal setting. Sometimes it's just good for us emotionally. If you are planning to leave someone, here's some things to consider. So some things to consider can include stowing important things away gradually. So this can mean clothes you might need, anything that's important to you in the home, keeping them somewhere that's safe. So that can be like hidden in your car, hidden at your work, given to a friend, or something like that. That can be a really great thing to start doing. And then regardless of whether or not you end up following through on leaving, or if it's not safe to do so or anything like that, you will have it ready to go. Something to include in that is going to be your important documents. So your important documents can include things like birth certificates, social security cards, financial documents, immigration documents or visas, anything like that that you might need. That's something that people commonly forget. Something else that you can start doing if it's safe to is stowing money away. So if you can, I highly recommend starting a bank account at a different bank that the abuser has no access to, that's only in your name. Obviously not everyone can do that. That's not something that's doable for everyone. But again, stowing any sort of finances away with someone that you trust can also work. So like having a friend or a family member or someone that you trust holding on to some finances for you can also work. And then that kind of comes down to this last point here, which is cluing in your safe people. So kind of like I said before over here with like your safe word systems and things like that, is that cluing in your safe people as part of your safety plan can be a really valuable thing. That can be, you know, safe friends and family members that, you know, won't tell the abuser what's going on, doctors, counselors, anybody like that. Doctors and counselors are mandated to report harm against children, vulnerable adults, and elder adults. So those are things that they are mandated to report. Abuse from one adult to another who does not fall into the vulnerable or elder adult categories is not a mandated report. You can ask someone to document that for you and not report it to law enforcement if you're not ready for that. Especially medical visits, so like ER doctors and things like that, you can ask them to report if like a physical injury happens and you want them to document that it was an instance of domestic violence. That's something you can do to leave a paper trail. You can also include those people in your overall safety plan. Those can be really great people to have on your team. And then lastly, again, like that's a form of documentation. So documenting is also, can sometimes be including in your safe people. So something that often comes up when you are trying to leave an abuser, or have left an abuser, is stalking. So some specific tips for stalking. Now, stalking is a really challenging thing to navigate, so there's no one perfect way to handle it, but here's some things that are commonly helpful for folks. Changing your like routes that you take to places regularly. So if there's places you go all the time, if there's a way for you to take a different route, doing that on a fairly kind of randomized basis can really help you. Changing your locks and your phone number if you can, those are great tips if those are possible for you. You can also ask your phone company if they can block your number. That is something that you can ask for, or there are a lot of texting apps out there now that allow you to send texts that randomize the phone number that they come from, so the person can't tell what number you're texting from. Those can be really helpful if you're trying to kind of keep away from someone figuring out your phone. Your social media is another thing to keep an eye on if you feel like someone is stalking you. So maybe looking and seeing, you can block a person, but you might also have some friends in common, kind of seeing who those people are, what that might look like. Keeping a regular check on your privacy settings on your social media can be really important if you don't know how to do that. I would recommend asking, you know, someone you know and trust or an advocate. They can always look through that with you. And then one of these things down here is this confidential address. So Washington State has an address confidentiality program that is basically gives you a fake address that you can use on your mail, your driver's license, your voter registration, anything like that. Your mail still physically comes to you, but it goes through a state program where they process it first, slap a fake address sticker on it, and then it's harder for someone to find out where you live. That is something that a lot of advocates can help you sign up for. So if that's something that you are in the works on, if you're already working with an advocate, ask them if there's a confidential address program in your state, because that can be a really great tool. And then lastly, again, I know I'm saying this over and over again, but document as much as you can. So keeping track of patterns, anything like that. If you do end up deciding to try to get like a restraining order against a person or something, or even just for your own sanity, documenting is super important. And then this last section here before we get to some resources is co-parenting. So a lot of people, especially with intimate partner violence, do share children with an abuser. And if you are in regular contact with that person or not, there are some things that you can take into consideration. So one really big thing, especially if you are working on leaving and maybe don't want the person to know where you are or what's up, alerting your kids' schools or child care resources can be a really good thing to remember to do. This can be either way. You know, if the other parent is not supposed to pick them up, let them know. If the other parent has a visitation schedule with your kids and is supposed to pick them up at certain times, let them know. You know, just making sure that the people who take care of your children other than you, if those people exist, and including them in your safety plan is going to be really important. Another thing is that a lot of legal documents require your physical address. So parenting plans, restraining orders, anything like that often require your physical address even if you are enrolled in an address confidentiality program. So that's just something to keep in mind that a lot of people don't find out until they're applying for legal services, is that sometimes this means that the person will have to know where you live. So kind of depending on where you live and what that looks like, that will often be the case. And then lastly, just talking to your kiddos about safety. So sometimes this is just a good opportunity to have that conversation with your kids, to talk to them about what safety means, what safety looks like, letting them know who's a safe person and who isn't, who are the safe people they can go to, letting them know that, you know, if they are saying having regular visitations with the other parent, how can they contact you? Reminding them that they can contact you, letting them know, you know, who's the safe neighbor in the other parent's neighborhood, things like that. Having basic safety talks with kiddos, this is just another flavor of that. And that it doesn't have to be anything super scary with your kids. You know, it can be something where you just say like, hey, things feel weird, here's who you can talk to, here's what you can do, which is just a good conversation to have with your kids anyway. So I think that talking to kiddos about, like, the kiddos in our lives about safety is a kind of just a good thing to do regardless. So this is a good chance to do it, if you haven't already, or if you already have, you know, building on those conversations we've already had with kiddos so that they feel safe and included and like we're thinking about them. Because chances are, if kids are observing things going on, they might be aware of more than we think they are anyway. So sometimes acknowledging that and letting them know, hey, we see you, we know you're still here, that can go a long way with kids too. So lastly, just a couple things to consider. Right now, a lot of people are in isolation, and isolation means higher risk for a lot of people. So any of this can be totally disrupted by the fact that a lot of us are in isolation right now, or might be in isolation in the future due to various reasons. So just a reminder that isolation can equal higher risk. And then some resources. So the National Domestic Violence Hotline can be accessed 24/7. They have a chat function on their website that's really cool. It's available in English and Spanish. There's lots of resources on their website, but they are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at this number. And then if you are local to us, so if you're in Spokane, YWCA Spokane does have this 24-hour line that you can call anytime, 509-326-2255. They can also be reached by email at help@ywcaspokane.org. So if calling is not safe for you, emailing them is also an option. And again, just a reminder that, you know, if someone's being abused, that it's not their fault, and that sometimes no amount of safety planning can stop certain things from happening, but it definitely can give us a sense of control over what's going on and help us to get out of a bad situation in a way that's as safe as possible, or if we're in a bad situation and can't get out, helping us to remain as safe as possible if we are in that situation. So hopefully this was helpful, either for yourself making a safety plan or if you're making a safety plan for someone else. And please reach out to us if you need more help with that.